I've been thinking as I was listening to all the speakers, and wonderful speakers and musicians, how this building for centuries has represented repression and violence and subjugation of people. And somehow this evening it comes to me that the whole essence of this building is being changed, because this evening it's filled with love and caring and a wonderful sense of community, which I think actually is what this building originally must have been actually intended for. 32 years ago yesterday, I was sitting beside Susan there in the dock when I was sentenced to death for a crime I didn't commit. And coming here this evening has been a hugely emotional experience for me. I actually went down the stairs and into the holding cell to re-experience that. And I showed Sunny, my wife, Sunny Jacobs, who's here with me, where it was. And in the middle of my trial, a police officer, Garda, who had 2 days after the original crime attempted to arrest the person whom they claimed was me, and actually was within arm's reach of that person, only he got away from him, sat there in the witness box where Claire sits. And when he was asked could he identify that person, he pointed to a man standing at the back of the public gallery up there. And he says, "That's him standing up there." Nevertheless, I was convicted. And I was told by the judge that the sentence was read that I was to be made to suffer death by execution in the manner prescribed by law. And several years later, in my study of law, I discovered that there was actually no manner prescribed by law by which they could have executed me. In plain, simple language, there was no legal method provided by which they could have hanged me, although they sentenced me to death and held me in a death cell. And 11 days before my sentence I was due to be hanged, they commuted that sentence to 40 years in prison without remission. And the two men who were convicted with me are still in prison, 32 years later. And I'm fully convinced that they have been in unlawful custody since 1980 and remain in unlawful custody to this day. I hope whenever I get my case to the court that I will be able to show that. And that's a little mission I have. But I do it through my lawyers now. I don't do it on my own behalf. At first I used to do. But I had to learn when I came out of prison that anger and bitterness were not emotions that were good for me. They were not emotions, they're justified emotions, and we all have them at times, and we're entitled to them. But you know, the holding of anger only harms me. The holding of bitterness only harms me. And I had to bring myself, and I did so through yoga and meditation, to a point where I could be in a spirit of forgiveness of the people who wrongfully sent me to prison. And when I arrived at that position in my life, I suddenly was free. I was free of the whole thing. And so I met, very, very fortunately, 3 years after I came out of prison, I met Sunny Jacobs. And Sunny had been 17 years wrongly imprisoned in the state of Florida in America. She spent 5 years in solitary confinement in a death cell under sentence of death, where nobody was allowed to speak to her, where she was allowed out of her cell twice a week for 20 minutes, so she could have a shower and a little walk in the courtyard accompanied by a jailer, and put back into her cell again. And whilst in her cell, she changed that cell into her sanctuary. She found within herself the strength and the means for that strength, namely again yoga and meditation, by which she was able to survive and come out a whole person and a better person. And so when eventually I met Sunny, who was invited here to Ireland by the Irish section of Amnesty, and there's a chap here who actually was in Texas on the occasion when she was invited. And we met and we shared our story with each other. We were astonished to find that we had both used the same disciplines to get us through our ordeals, namely yoga and meditation. But we also found out, when we discussed our cases with each other, that the face of injustice is the same everywhere. And since then, we've traveled the world speaking on for human rights and the abolition of the death penalty, even as far away as Kazakhstan. And we find the same thing everywhere, that the face of injustice is the same. And you know, sometimes when we're giving a talk, somebody will say to us, "But what about justice?" And Sunny has this lovely way of answering that. She says, "There is no justice. There is just us." And she doesn't mean just us, she and I. She means just us, all of us. Because collectively, we can make justice. But if we leave it to other people to administer justice on our behalf and don't have the proper checks and balances to see that they do it in accordance with the correct way, we're going to get injustice. And that's part of the problem of our society. And I sometimes think, and I say, that actually, unfortunately, the state is riddled with corruption. Now, when I say corruption, I don't mean necessarily corruption in the sense of fraud or illegality. I mean corruption in the sense that ethics have become corrupted, standards have become corrupted. We're like a nation. I've heard somebody say recently that we're a nation of people who say, sure, it'll do. Sure, it's all right. Sure, it'll get better. And we pass the buck on to somebody else to make the changes that we actually should be making ourselves. Collectively, we can change this country. Collectively, we can be a voice, not just, we are all one single voice within ourselves, but collectively we are a powerful voice that can speak out for justice and equality. And the three missing ingredients that I see in our public life today, which is transparency, equality, and accountability. They're not there, and they should be there. And if they were there, this awful, horrendous scene that happened with the financial situation would not or could not have happened. We can make change, but we have to, within ourselves, change ourselves. This is what I found out when I came out of prison. I had to let go of the anger and the bitterness I had. I had to turn myself towards healing and reconciliation, because that's where my solution is. That's where my salvation is. And Sunny found the same thing. And I would suggest to you that that's where all of our salvations is. Sunny says, and she says it very eloquently when she's asked, she says, in the final analysis, she says, peace is the way and love is the answer. And I endorse that. And I put it to you that that is our way forward. And I thank everyone for being here. Thank you.